now going to move on to our second lightning talk. The floor is yours, David.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Robert. I hope you can hear me. So thank you again for the invitation and for the introduction. And I want just to say I'm not a theologian. I'm doing my best to be an historian. I hope I do a good job. But however, I would like to refer to Robert and Omar's introduction and talk for the topic we wish to discuss. And I do it in a few briefly minutes. A few weeks ago, I was talking with a good friend of mine in Israel who said that since October 7th, we have been in an era of hester panim. In Hebrew, the Jewish theological term means the hiding of God's face and describes the absence of manifest divine intervention. This term, hester panim, caused me to reflect on two texts from the short Israeli-Palestinian history when God was present and absent. Following these reflections, I will rethink the consciousness of October 7th and the war that followed in Israeli society as hester panim. In December 1926, the celebrated Kabbalah scholar Gershom Scholem wrote an interesting letter regarding the nature of the Hebrew language to his friend, the German Jewish philosopher Franz Rosenzweig. His letter warns us that the seemingly secular Jewish cultural renewal in Palestine will lead to a state in which, in his words, God will not remain silent, end of quote. Or in other words, the Jewish theological core will erupt. The presence of God is emphasized in the opposite direction in Palestinian poet Rashid Hussein's poem, God is a Refugee, which describes the deserted mosques and churches following the Nakba. Hussein's poem expresses the Palestinian hester panim, the hiding of God's face and the orphanhood of those who survived the Nakba. I wish to link Hussein's hester panim to Scholem's warning about God's vocal breakout and to say something about contemporary Israel. From its birth, the Zionist movement sought to establish a culture that would shift the center of collective Jewish identity from one based on commandments, Jewish law, and Jewish rituals, and center it around national identity signifiers such as language, territory, and culture. In this regard, Zionism is based on concealing God, both by exceling it and by implementing it into the national frame. Additionally, Zionism and the State of Israel are founded on an ignorance of what Edward Said termed the standpoint of its victims, namely Palestinians suffer from the Jewish return to Palestine as well as the Jewish fulfillment of their right to self-determination. Like with God's concealment, that of Palestinians is consisted of both forgetfulness and active marginalization. In other words, Zionism is based on the voluntary self-hester panim, hiding the faces of both God and the Palestinians. During the last few years, and here I relate to my topic, there has been a struggle between those who wish to see a secular, democratic, and liberal Jewish state and those who are rightly accused of being fundamental right-wing extremists who aimed for the establishment of a fundamental messianic theocracy. The most prominent manifestation of this debate is the judicial reform, led by the most right-wing government in Israeli history. This reform led hundreds of thousands of primarily Jewish Israelis engaging in protests and strikes on what they call the battle for Israel as a democracy. In some ways, this is a struggle to keep God silent, and when his voice is heard through the mouth of fundamentalists, it is unpleasant. However, as Scholem warned us, this unpleasant vocal breakout was inevitable since Zionism has a denied theological core that must emerge. Additionally, anyone who's driven on the Israeli roads near the Gaza border in the last years has witnessed the Israeli blindness to the suffering of Palestinians. Rows of trees were planted and walls were constructed in order to conceal the tragic state of Palestinian Gazans. In that sense, Hamas' horrific and unacceptable violence on October 7th, on the midst of an Israeli and again primarily Jewish debate regarding the level of Israeli democracy, is not a symbol of hester panim. Vice versa, it is a call for Israeli Jewish society to open its eyes to both its blind spots, the theological foundation of Jewish presence in Palestine and that of those who suffer from it. I believe that this dual eye-opening is the only way to achieve a Jewish ethical and democratic presence in Palestine and Israel. Unfortunately, it appears that not only the war does not contribute to this desired eye-opening, it is deepening the grip of racist violence and fundamentalist stances in Israel. The October 7th trauma has fueled the rise of ultra-right politicians and religious fundamentalist leaders in Israeli society. The demonstrates for prisoner exchange and ceasefire has a secular character, while religion is affiliated today in Israel with militant approach. Thus, it is so important to raise a clear religious theological voice in this regard. Here I relate to Omar's. An alternative voice of the unsilenced God, which would be a voice of hope and peace. And I truly hope, and saying it from the bottom of my heart, I hope that meetings such as the one we are conducting tonight will enable us, Jews and Palestinians, to harness the tragic situation in which we find ourselves in order to open our eyes to God who calls us to acknowledge suffering and to fight against it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, David, for that presentation. Really powerful anthropomorphic language that we've had from both of the presentations so far, focusing on embodied themes of who you are and also sight, blindness, the face of God. And hopefully we can explore these themes in greater detail later on.